Hello, everybody. Charles from GMAT Ninja here. Welcome to our first episode in the GMAT Ninja Friday Series 2026 edition. So first part of this series, we're going to cover everything you need to know for reading comprehension. So we're going to do somewhere between 4 and 7 episodes on reading comprehension. Then we're going to do some critical reasoning. The reading comprehension series, we're going to build this very differently than previous series. Typically, you see reading comprehension taught as, hey, we're going to focus on certain question types, certain passage types. So we're going to do science passages and humanities passages and long ones and short ones. That's not what we're doing here. We're actually going to organize this by question type. It's a little bit different. Today, we're going to focus on primary purpose questions. Spoiler alert, pretty much everything is kind of a primary purpose question. If you can nail those primary purpose questions, it means you've read the passage really, really well. So what we're going to focus on today is, what does that mean? How do you read a passage really, really well? What does it mean to focus in the right sorts of ways? How do you attack a primary purpose question? Obviously, we'll flow from that. And then obviously we're going to do some other questions that are things that don't look like primary purpose questions, but they really are if you can anchor yourself in the why. Why is the author writing this? What is the purpose? Everything you do on reading comprehension is going to be easier from there. So episode number 1, primary purpose questions. Really, it's about reading comprehension passages super, super effectively. And then as we go on in the series, we'll pick on different question types and we'll kind of keep building on those foundations we lay today. If you're watching this live, I feed off of your feedback. So please weigh in the chat. Let us know what you think. If you have a question along the way, even if it's a question that's kind of off topic, fire away if it'll fit. I am more than happy to answer it. If you've never seen me before on these videos, I'm Charles. I'm from GMAT Ninja. I've been tutoring since 2001. Run a little company called GMAT Ninja. I'm the dumbest guy at GMAT Ninja. We hire amazing people. So last hiring round, hired 3 people out of 4,000 applicants. We also have, we do private tutoring. We have a wonderful free course. If you're interested in that free course, check out this QR code. It will take you to absolutely everything you need for the exam in video form for free. All right, with that, let's get into your first passage today. I don't want to say too much as far as like normally in these videos, I'll say, hey, here's how I want you to approach reading comprehension. I'll go on a long rant about it. I'm going to try to keep that short here today. The bottom line of where do errors come from on reading comprehension? What do we typically see? Whether it's primary purpose questions or somewhere else. Often you're overreading or you're underreading. What do I mean by that? If you're overreading, you might take a passage and just say, hey, I'm going to treat this like a textbook. Hey, this is like an econ textbook or an engineering textbook, and I'm just going to absorb all the facts I can. And in your head, this thing becomes fact. And maybe you're hanging on every little word and you're reading really intensely and maybe you're memorizing things. Don't do that, because if you do that, number 1, you're going to waste time. Number 2, you're going to miss out on the big picture. Why is it here? Well, if it just turns into fact, you're missing out on the synthesis. You're missing out on the connections. So you don't want to do that. That's overreading. Underreading. There's all kinds of gimmicks and tricks and silliness out there you'll see on the internet that says, oh, skim at times. Never skim. You can't skim these. You're going to miss important stuff. You want to make sure you're reading with a nice, even pace and asking the question, why? Why did the author write this? What do they want from me? So we're going to tackle 2 passages today, time permitting. Again, live session. So I am more than happy to jump into whatever you guys are asking in the live group. But we're going to tackle 2 passages. One is a science-ish passage. It's going to feel like a pile of facts. You're not going to see a lot of opinions in there necessarily, but if you really anchor yourself in the why, you're going to see that it becomes a lot easier. Then we're going to do one that's kind of more of a history type passage. You see more opinions there, but it's dense, it's hard to read. I'm not coddling you guys here. So I'm going to give you a passage that's sciencey, a passage that's kind of history, humanities. They're fairly tough passages, and I promise you will get better results from them if you stop at the end of every paragraph and ask yourself, why? Why did the author write this? What does the author want from me? What points of view do I see represented? Stay anchored in that big picture. Don't skim. Don't obsess over facts, and good things will happen. All right. With that, I'm going to give you 1 paragraph at a time. So this first passage has 3 paragraphs. So if you're watching this live, go ahead and check out this first paragraph. And what I'm going to want you to do once we get that paragraph on the screen, little passage about salmon habitats. I like surfing on salmon, don't you? So read that first paragraph, and then I want you to stop, maybe come up with a 8 to 12 word summary, something like that. Not a ton of words that says, okay, why? Why did the author write this? If you're watching live, as soon as you've got that little 8 to 12 word summary, please punch it in the chat, and then we'll take it from there. All right, go ahead and take a moment on paragraph 1. Oops. And I'll get rid of that banner. Give me just a moment. Again, my usual bit of nagging. If you're watching live, as soon as you think you know what this first paragraph's about, please toss it into the chat. I want to see how well you guys are tracking with what the author is after here. All right, we'll go ahead and get going on this. Okay, great. I'm starting to see some stuff come from the live group. I appreciate this sort of thing enormously. It's about the decline of the salmon's population, causes of decline. And just know that whenever if you're watching live, you throw something into the chat and I bring it up live and I might pick holes in it. That's out of love. I appreciate this enormously because if this is what you're thinking, there's other people thinking something similar. I want you to be really careful with this because I want you to really fight for the why. What is the author really after? Do we see any opinions here? Look, we don't always. I'm not sure the author's opinion is very clear here, but I think the first time I read this paragraph, and I think for a lot of people, it's kind of, oh, well, hey, there's habitat loss. Humans are destroying habitat, 150 years of human activity, bad for salmon. Okay, great. This is pretty close to what I got out of it the first time, and which is why I appreciate this so much. Got other people saying the same thing, reasons for the decline. Yeah, what may be the cause of decline? Okay, this is great. Thank you so much for this, guys. Keep them coming. I would argue that's not quite where the author's going, and you want to go a little bit deeper than that. I think you guys might be under reading a little bit, or maybe kind of underreporting your thinking. Okay, so what's the author really after here? It's like, okay, hey, there's decline, great, habitat decline. And then kind of in that second sentence right there, you start to see a little hint, maybe not quite an opinion, but there's a viewpoint. Well, there's an obvious numerical effect, but however, habitat loss also has the potential to reduce genetic diversity. And then the rest of the paragraph is kind of about that genetic diversity, right? So it's most evident when the whole population goes extinct, but most analysts believe that there's environmental degradation underneath the demise. But even when rivers are recolonized, even when the river starts to be populated by salmon again, the unique genes have been lost. Okay. So what are we really seeing here when we really read it and kind of focus on why? What is the author really going after? Are there any twists here? You've got a however in there. And I'm not saying however is this really important word, but sometimes it kind of gives us a hint, right? So what's the author saying? So paragraph 1, how would I summarize this? I'm off screen there somehow. Oh, why not? Okay. So what's the author going after there? Yeah, the obvious numerical effect of habitat loss. So we'll say numerical effect obvious, but then it focuses on the loss of genetic diversity. Even with recolonization. Okay, that's interesting. So the author is setting up this kind of distinction between, hey, habitat loss, of course, hey, there's a loss of numbers, of course there's extinctions, but what's really going on there? What's the thing that's interesting to the author? It sounds like it's that loss of genetic diversity. So the unique genes of the original populations get lost. Okay, so we see the little hint of an opinion, little hint of sort of a dichotomy or some sort of tension that the author is setting up. And if we have that background, if we have that backbone, when we read that first paragraph, it's going to help us have a good jumping off point for the next couple of paragraphs. Now, question I get all the time, how many notes should you take in practice? What you're going to see me do here in my admittedly not very great handwriting, I'm going to shoot for kind of that 8 to 12 words. Sometimes in these videos, I go a little bit longer, so it's easier for me to show my thinking to you guys. But I'm pretty agnostic as far as whether you actually write something down when you're taking the test. Different people are going to do better writing tons of notes. If you're one of those people, that's okay. Just make sure that your notes are efficient and actually help you engage. Other people, as soon as you start writing notes, your brain flies off. It's just a question of how you're wired. Some people, the writing helps. Some people, the writing actually hurts. So get to know yourself, experiment, see what works for you. But what I always want you to do, stop and process and ask that question, why? Why is this here at the end of every paragraph? That's the key. Whether or not you write it down is a fairly minor detail. Figure out what works for you. All right, with that, let's add another paragraph to the mix. Go ahead and take a moment. And if you're watching live, as soon as you think you know what's going on here, and as soon as you think you know how it ties into that first paragraph, please weigh in the comments. And if you're not watching live, pause if you need to, if you need another moment on this paragraph. Otherwise, live group, if you have thoughts, even as I'm talking, feel free to fire them into the chat. Love to see them. Okay. So long paragraph. And often what happens on some of these kind of science-y kind of passages, environmental here, when you get these sort of dense, detail-based paragraphs, I see a lot of people kind of go, I'm going to memorize all these facts. It's going to be great. Or you start skimming. That's the temptation. It's part of why I picked this passage. I like that there's this dense beast of a paragraph in the middle of it. Because those of you who tend to overread and obsess over facts, you're going to take this and obsess over facts. Those of you who tend to skim will skim. What I want you to do instead, again, it's focus on the why. Why is this here? And just as importantly, how does it connect up with this first paragraph? So what do we have at the beginning of this second paragraph? So these large-scale disturbances in one location have the potential to alter genetic structure of the populations in neighboring areas. Okay. So this whole paragraph, really the whole passage so far, yeah, habitat loss, it causes a numerical effect on the population. Okay, obvious enough. But now it's all about this genetic thing that's going on. So where's the author headed with this? So even a disturbance in one location is going to affect the genetic structure elsewhere. Well, why is that? It's because of this idea of strain. So we'll say that disturbance, so alters, we'll say the genetic structure, we'll just say genetics in other locations. And why is that? That's because of strain. And I'm not going to write down all the details here. I don't think that's very helpful. But the idea is that normally you have salmon that are going to go back to their native streams. So wherever they were born, they go back there to spawn again. Okay, they go back home to breed, have their own little salmon puppies. Awesome, great. Normally, you have these rates of straying that are about 15%, something like that. That's good. But when you have a disturbance, you have a much higher rate of straying. So straying rates increase with some sort of disturbance. And what can that do as we get towards the end of the paragraph or middle of the paragraph? What you have there is it's kind of embedded sort of right in the middle. Why is that problematic when you have a disturbance and there's high rates of straying? Well, it's problematic because the misdirected fish are going to breed in a new location other than where they were born. So they can interbreed with the existing stock to such a degree that any local adaptations are diluted. So now you've weakened the ability of those fish in that location to survive to those local conditions. So that's where really high straying rates can cause problems. That's going to basically weaken the local adaptations. All right, so notice, this isn't about pulling out key facts. That's not exactly what we're doing here at all. It's going, okay, wait a minute, where's the author going? What do we see in that first paragraph? Okay, habitat loss, bad, we all know that. It can cause a decline in the number of a population of salmon or whatever. Okay, we know that. But it's the genetic disruptions. And then what does the second paragraph get into? It's the subtleties of that genetic disruption. Well, how does it happen? Even if it's environmental decline in one area and there's another area that's pristine, you still cause damage. Why? It's because of this idea of straying. So it's talking about this idea of even with recolonization, so even when a stream that was damaged becomes colonized with new salmon, you still have a genetic population that's different that causes problems. And that's how those two paragraphs are connected. So again, you always want to fight for how are these things connected? If you want to ace these primary purpose questions, be efficient on everything. That's the key. All right. One last paragraph, give you guys a couple minutes on this one. And same thing, if you're watching us live, please let us know kind of what you're getting out of that third paragraph. All right, if you're not watching live, pause if you need to, especially if you need more time to kind of figure out how these three paragraphs fit together. For the live group, we're going to keep going here. Nice short little paragraph at the end. No big deal. Seeing some nice stuff from the live group. Appreciate this. Yeah, there you go. I mean, that's it. So nice short paragraph at the end to kind of summarize things. You don't always get these pretty little summaries at the end of GMAT passages. It's part of why I'm so adamant about fighting for purpose every step of the way, because sometimes you're the one that has to kind of figure out like, hey, what's the author's real conclusion here? And you don't get to invent conclusions, but you have to go, wait a minute, what did all this add up to? And maybe the main point was buried somewhere or wasn't stated very explicitly. Here, it's really nice. I mean, the author basically says it and says, kind of at the end there, so a dramatic increase in strength from damaged areas to more pristine streams results in increased gene flow, which can in turn lower the overall fitness of subsequent generations. And it's really just saying, yeah, what's the punchline here? So increased straying. Now, we might not be able to quantify it exactly, but something like what you got in the Mount St. Helens eruption is going to lower the genetic fitness of, we'll say, later generations. Again, apologies for my terrible handwriting. Yeah, there you go. Nice job. Thank you so much for that. Not so sorry. Okay. I'm going to let you loose on the first question. No surprise here. It's a primary purpose question. Then we're going to do a couple more. that are not primary purpose questions, but they are so much easier if you've done this exercise and you're really anchored in the purpose every step of the way. Go ahead and tackle this first question. Live group, as soon as you get an answer, toss it into the chat, please. All right. Okay. So the primary, if you've done your work here, so one of the questions I get all the time is about efficiency on reading comprehension. Oh, how much time should I spend reading the passage? Well, it depends on the passage is the answer to that. And I wouldn't worry about saying, oh, I need to spend exactly no more than 2 minutes or no more than 3 minutes. Put all that stuff out of your head. What you want to do is make sure you've read it, not overread it, not underread it. And if you've done that, the questions go so much faster. And typically when we see people who really struggle with timing on reading comprehension, why is that? It's not because they're spending too long on the passage, usually. That can happen, certainly. But it's more if they're spending too much time on the questions. And if you haven't read the passage well, as in you haven't really fit all the pieces together, the big picture together, that's when you go back and forth a ton between the passage and the questions. You'll see that with the work we've already done here, we're going to make pretty quick work of this. So is the primary purpose, we'll take these one at a time. Again, if you haven't seen any of our videos before, always use cross-elimination. I don't want you to fall in love with one answer choice. Often there's going to be one answer choice that sounds right, it sounds delicious, it sounds great, but there's one little word that makes it wrong. Don't fall in love with an answer choice. Fall in love with beautiful people. Fall in love with great food. Fall in love with great places. Don't fall in love with an answer choice. So find 4 wrong answers, not one right answer. We're going to go through all of them one at a time, as always. A, argue against a conventional explanation for the extinction of certain salmon populations. Not at all. So the author isn't denying that habitat loss causes extinctions. It's just arguing that, hey, there's also this genetic diversity thing that happens and we need to pay attention to it. So it is definitely not arguing against any conventional way of thinking about extinctions. Correct a common misunderstanding about the behavior of salmon. Nothing about a common misunderstanding about their behavior. That's not there at all. It's just saying, hey, we seem to not talk about genetic diversity enough in these situations. Let's do that here. C, compare the effects of human activity on salmon populations with the effects of natural disturbances. That's not at all. We're not comparing natural disturbances with human disturbances. We're saying, hey, human disturbances cause a problem. Now, here's a natural one that teaches us something about what happens when it comes to straying and genetic diversity and all of that. So C is out. D, differentiate the particular effects of human activities. Not differentiating effects of different human activities, not in at all. We're focused on how habitat loss or habitat degradation can affect genetic biodiversity. I really hope we like E, or else we're in trouble. Describe how environmental degradation can cause changes in salmon populations that extend beyond the numerical reduction. Exactly. That's exactly what we've got here. And if you've done your job on that first reading, very, very easy question. So yeah, getting some great comments in here. Thank you so much for this. Careful, careful, careful. I would not reduce these to just the first word. You're going to get away with that. Sometimes it is not going to be reliable. So what I don't want you to do, and by the way, I don't think this is exactly what you're doing. I'm going to take this too far. You could look at this and go, well, hey, is the author arguing, correcting, comparing, differentiating, or describing? You can take the first word of those and run with it and kind of say, well, he's describing, so it's E. Don't do that. You've got to read the whole thing. I wouldn't be so reductionist about this. And I don't think you actually are being that reductionist, but just be very careful not to overreact to one word. those shortcuts on reading comprehension, they don't work, guys. I hate to say it. I wish they did. Um, wonderful. Great question. We are going to get into this on the next couple of questions because we're not going to stop at the primary purpose question. Why? All of those other questions, the inference questions, and so on, they are so much easier if you've done this. You'll see it in just a minute. We'll do it with a couple more questions. And later in the series, we're going to have a whole video on inference questions. So any other questions that you really struggle on, even when you feel you've read the passage well, we will get into that later in this series. If you have any particular ones you want to see, let us know in the comments. Let us know in the comments on YouTube, on GMATClub, anywhere, and we'll try to integrate into the series. So thank you so much for that. One last one I think is a great question. So I'm not saying you should make notes. So I said this a little bit earlier. I'll say it again because this is one of those things that I think requires some introspection, some self-knowledge, some calibration if you're new to this. What I'm doing on the board is I always try to reflect a short summary of each paragraph that focuses on the why. I want you to do that no matter what at the end of every paragraph. What I really care about is stopping and going, okay, why? Why does the author do this? What does the author want from me? Stop the end of the second paragraph and go, why? What does the author want from me? And how does it connect to the previous? Same thing, third paragraph. How does that connect to the previous? If you've done that, these primary purpose questions are pretty easy. Now, that said, I don't care whether you write it down or not. That is a personal decision. I do it here for the video so you can see my thinking, even though my handwriting's heinous. Some people are going to do a much better job of engaging in this process, engaging in the text, pulling what you need to out of it. Some of you are going to be so much more effective at that if you take notes, and those notes will probably look a little bit like mine. Some of you might want to take even more notes. I would be very careful because a lot of the time when I see people taking more notes, it becomes a little bit brain dead and you're writing things to write things. Sometimes it does help to write down more. It's a very small part of the population that I think should write down more than this. But for a lot of you, as soon as you start worrying about what to write down, your brain kind of escapes. So bottom line here is I want this process to happen. I feel very, very strongly about that. That is the key to efficiency, effectiveness on reading comprehension. But whether it happens in your head or on your paper, I'm agnostic. It doesn't take very long to write down 8 to 12 words, 15 words. So if it helps you, by all means, do it. It's an investment. It'll pay off. It doesn't take very long. If you prefer not to write it down and you can keep track of everything and it gives you the engagement you need, don't write anything down if you don't absolutely need to. So very much a personal call. And we've seen, again, hundreds of students over the years we work with one-on-one tutoring, and we try to hone that for people and kind of say, the way your brain works, you're going to be better off writing stuff down. We can test it out. For somebody else's brain, you're better off not writing it down. But I do insist on this general process. That's what's going to help make sure that you're not overreading, not underreading. Awesome question. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, it depends on what you mean by, great to see as always, Pooja. Depends on what you mean by mental maps. There are different companies, different people who use that term in very different ways. I mean, this kind of is a mental map, right? So it's not saying I'm going to pinpoint the exact locations of things, but because I don't think there's any need for that. But if you have the big picture in hand and you know why the author's writing everything, when you do get a detailed question, you know exactly where to look for it because you have a comprehension of the structure of the author's argument. So different people use the word mental maps in different ways. I personally don't use that term a whole lot. But if you like that term, yeah, this is a version of that mental map, I suppose. But it's one that's very engaged in what you really need for GMAT passages, which is big picture, why, connections between paragraphs. What does the author want from us? Okay. One more question here. Might do 2 more on this passage. I want to try to wrap up in under an hour here. So I don't know if we're going to get to all 6 questions I had teed up. But all right, have at it. Live group, let me know if you've got something. And if you're not real sure, just say, I'm stuck. Give you 20 more seconds. All right. Tough one, to be fair. And by the way, that primary purpose question, that first one we did, it's the easiest question I'm going to give you in this whole video. Everything else is a lot tougher. That was actually the easy one. So I'm not coddling you guys in this series. Sometimes I like to start these videos with basics. Hey, here's how to read a basic passage. Here's how to answer basic questions. Here, I'm not messing around. These are all really tough from here forward. Okay. So inference question, but if you've been anchored in the big picture, it is a much easier question. And again, we'll do a whole video on inference questions later in this series. So it can be inferred from the passage that the occasional failure of some salmon to return to their natal streams, I think that's how you pronounce it, in order to spawn provides a mechanism by which. So why are they doing that? So why is it that sometimes salmon don't go back to the place they were born? But you kind of see that embedded in that second paragraph a little bit. And as we kind of think about the big picture of the passage again, it's like, well, what's all this about? Okay, loss of genetic diversity, and it's this whole business of straying that we were talking about. So low rates of straying are good. Why? Because, well, if population gets knocked out, then, or let's say that someplace gets degraded, there's some sort of problem, whether it's naturally caused or caused by human damage, and a stream gets damaged, and then it wipes out the salmon population. But then later on, the stream is clean again. Well, there's always going to be some salmon that kind of get lost and end up there. They end up straying, they end up there, and they start a new population. Okay, well, that's great. It's just when you have too much straying, you start messing around with the population diversity. Okay, so that's why they do it, or that's what it does. So A, does this provide a mechanism by which pristine streams that are near polluted streams become polluted? No, the salmon straying is not causing pollution to move around. That's not it. B, the particular adaptations of the polluted stream salmon population can be preserved without dilution. No, it's kind of the opposite, right? Because the salmon that are moving from one area to another are actually going to change the genetics of that population. So definitely not B. C, the number of salmon in the pristine habitats, the number decreases relative to the number in polluted streams. That has nothing to do with this idea of straying salmon. That's not going to do that. An environmentally degraded stream, D, could be recolonized by salmon populations should the stream recover. Exactly. That's exactly the benefit, right? So these salmon that don't go back to the stream they were born in can recolonize a place if that stream recovers. So D is looking pretty good. How do we feel about E? The extinction of the salmon populations that spawn is accelerated. No, the salmon moving around isn't going to accelerate any extinctions. That's not going to happen. All right, answer is D here. All right, I'm going to throw one more at you. And then, then we'll do one more passage. We're not going to get through all the questions for that passage, but I think that's okay. And why is this not advancing? Let's try this again. There we go. All right, couldn't take a moment. All right, as always, pause if you need to. Live group, keep firing away with thoughts on this. I only see 2 people so far, and I really appreciate you too, because I know one of you fairly well from all these live streams. I always appreciate kind of your willingness to kind of jump in and give your thoughts. I think this is a really tough one. And again, it's less tough if you're anchored nicely in the big picture. That's the whole theme of this video. That's what makes you more efficient. But still, I mean, as you look at this question, I mean, that's a word salad. There's a lot of words going on there. I think it's a tough one. And we see that statistically as well when we look at data on how many people get this wrong. A lot of you guys get this one wrong. Okay, which of the following does the author mention as support for the view that environmental disturbances caused by human activity could increase straying rates? So some subtlety here as we get into the answer choices. A, the existence of salmon populations in rivers where the elimination of salmon habitat by human activity had previously made the fish extinct. Now, that doesn't tell us anything about whether straying rates would increase. So this is something that happens even when straying rates are low. This isn't evidence to support the idea that human activity would cause an increase in those straying rates. So A is out. B, the results of studies measuring the impact of straying rates on habitat loss. It's exactly what the author's after in that last paragraph, saying, hey, qualitatively, we think this would be very much like the Mount St. Helens eruption, that the straying rates would increase just from human activity, just the same as they would from this volcano eruption, but we don't have studies on it. So we know that B is not right. The author actually kind of directly attacks that in the last paragraph. C, this was the popular one for my favorite participants in the live stream. The potential for disturbances in one environment to cause the introduction of novel genes into salmon populations in neighboring areas. Okay, the author talks about this, absolutely. But is this something that supports the idea that straying rates increase? It's actually kind of the other way around. Increased straying rates might cause C to happen, right? So that there's novel genes in neighboring areas other than where the damage was. That's a thing that can happen as a result of high straying rates. But this doesn't support the idea that human activity would cause higher straying rates, which is what the question is asking. Really subtle. So C is relevant in a way, but it kind of gets the direction of causality wrong. C isn't support for why the straying rates increase. So C is out. D, the weaknesses in the view that the extinction of the entire salmon population is the only mechanism by which destruction of habitat, et cetera, okay, this one is fortunately way off, because again, this has nothing to do with why straying rates would increase. This has a lot to do with the heart of the author's argument, but this is not support for why straying rates increase. D is out, and I really hope we like DE here. Absence of any reason for believing that disturbances brought by human activity would be different from what we see from natural causes. And that is exactly what we see in the last paragraph. Hey, we don't have any studies on this, but we know, but we have no reason to think that it wouldn't be similar to what we see from something like a volcano eruption. So E is our answer. All right, we are 42 minutes in, guys. If anybody watching live has any particular questions about reading comp, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, I'm going to go into this next passage. We're not going to get through all the questions. It is only 2 paragraphs, fortunately. We'll probably get to the primary purpose question on it and then go from there. And yeah, loving some of this introspection, guys. Yeah, that's it. It's really easy to start accelerating through. And I think, when we see people whose reading skills are fine, you guys can read just fine. Again, sometimes we run into people who have real reading weaknesses. Most of you don't. Most of you are good enough to get a really strong score on the GMAT in terms of just your fundamental ability to read a sentence, read a paragraph, understand what it says. But it's really easy you get under time pressure. You get this idea that there's terrible time pressure, and you just start accelerating. And it's so easy for that to happen. And you want to keep your pace even. Everything I'm trying to teach you guys about how to approach a passage, how to think about purpose as you read, it's about keeping that pace even, keeping that focus even. Same thing on your question stems. It's easy to accelerate through and start lunging and going, oh, well, I'm going to react to one word, or I'm going to kind of skim through it. Don't do that. It's so easy to do. So keep your pace really even, really focus on that. And as you're analyzing your own errors, go, wait a minute. If that question felt easy to you, some questions are just hard, that's fine. If a question felt easy to you and you missed it, that's a real sign that you probably accelerated through, skimmed something, and that's what's causing the damage. And again, an adaptive test like the GMAT, you miss easy questions, that really hurts your score more than missing harder ones. So really focus on that pacing. And again, thank you guys so much, live group, for jumping in on some of this stuff. Okay. Second and final passage. we'll try to do the passage justice, maybe get to one question, wrap it up. Some royal feminists, and go ahead and take a moment. Live group, as soon as you think you have the why, you can tell me what the author's after here. Punch it in the chat. And again, I'll move a little quicker on this one. All right, as always, pause if you need a little more time. So again, whenever you're watching these videos, doing them on your own, doing these questions on your own, practicing, don't ever shortcut that process of taking the time to go, okay, why is this here? Yeah, that I really appreciate this. So I'm not sure how to pronounce your username there. Not so Suri. Awesome. This is great. Thank you so much for the participation. You're making me happy, putting a smile on my face. If you have friends that are studying, invite them and come talk trash to me in these live streams. I really appreciate it. So yeah, this is pretty much spot on. And one of the things that as you try to go from good to great on GMAT reading comprehension, one of the things I want you to get better at tuning into is, hey, where do I see signs of the author's viewpoint or somebody else's viewpoint for that matter, but especially the author's? And what I find interesting about this passage is I think it's a little bit, it's not the most accessible topic. So probably very few of you have thought about forerunners of modern feminism in 17th century England and their associations with royalism. That's probably not a thing most of us have thought about or read about. It's an unfamiliar topic for most people. I think it's a fairly dense passage in general, but the author does a very nice thing right from the beginning and said, hey, it's an odd but indisputable fact. Okay, well, the author's giving us an opinion right away. So indisputable fact, not so interesting. It's odd. So hey, there's this odd thing that you have feminists or forerunners of feminism. I'm just going to shorten it to feminists here. Feminists are often associated with royalists. And then kind of goes into, well, what is it about kind of the royalists instead of the parliamentarians that sort of makes that weird? Well, then it kind of talks about so this guy Filmer and sort of the patriarchalism, I think is the word that the author uses here. The radical patriarchalism, which is a whole lot of syllables. Patriarchal. So, and then there's kind of towards the end of the paragraph, well, hey, maybe there's a question of whether this is really the right thing, that all of the royalists are like this guy. maybe that's not really the case. So, filmers are royalists. Maybe it's not the case that all the royalists think this way. But if there's really no relationship between sort of how royalists and parliamentarians think about organization of family or women's rights or anything like that, then you would expect the feminists to be equally divided, and they're not. So it's really weird. Like, why is it that all the feminists are royalists? So introducing this puzzle, great. So yeah, great job, guys. Really appreciate some of this stuff. With historians, yeah. All right. And now we'll head on to the second paragraph, second and final paragraph. And again, I'm going to try to move a little faster on this passage than I did in the others. Got about 10 minutes left. All right, as always, pause, need a little more time with it. Yeah, yeah, love it. Thank you. My man or my woman, I don't know your real name, but yeah, this is great. And just, it's fun just in the course of this 51 minutes we've been here. I'm seeing kind of your thinking on this evolve from the live chat, and I really appreciate that. Awesome work. Okay. So do we see the author's opinion in the second paragraph? Maybe not, but if we sort of, again, we always want to anchor ourselves in how do these paragraphs connect? Why is the author writing this? First paragraph, we have sort of this, well, this is really weird. Why is it that the early feminists or the forerunners to modern feminism are always associated with the royalist side? Why is that? It doesn't make any sense because the royalists are more likely to be patriarchal. Why are they all on that side? Okay, so then the author introduces this Gallagher person and says, well, why is that? So Gallagher is saying that one of these early feminists, so Cavendish, basically has sort of used a piece of this sort of royalist thinking where she's what's the phrase in here, that she's a self-sufficient being within her mental empire. She's kind of this absolute monarch of her own world. So pretty interesting, right? So it's basically saying there's a great phrase in there, and I'm struggling to find it again, that within her singularity, there's something else in there, transition, she's eccentric. Yeah, anyway, so absolute monarch, there it is towards the end. Cavendish repeatedly invoked the model of the absolute monarch, a figure that was the metaphor for the self-enclosed autonomous nature of the individual person, whether that person is male or female. So basically saying that Cavendish, this early feminist, so use the idea of absolute monarch in her world. And then the author goes on to say, well, okay, yeah, later feminists or later precursors to feminism kind of separated that out a little bit and kind of said, oh, well, we want to break free from the political and social isolation that the absolute singularity entailed. So it evolved later. But if this whole thing is about sort of early feminists, forerunners to modern feminists, the way that the author is resolving kind of this odd thing, this odd paradox that she sees in the first paragraph, it's, hey, we've got the scholar Gallagher who says, right, one of these great thinkers, Cavendish, one of these early feminists, sort of gives us the idea that, yeah, actually, this idea of absolute monarchy that is consistent with royalism is actually consistent with her view of early feminism, which is, I'm the absolute monarch within my own world as a woman. There you go. Okay. So pretty clear how those two paragraphs fit together. And that's it. That's all we really need to get out of it on that first reading. All right. Going to give you one question on this, and then we're going to wrap up. Unsurprisingly, it will be the primary purpose question. Go ahead and take a moment, and then we'll wrap up. All right, as always, pause if you need to. So yeah, again, if we've done our work here, this is a fairly easy question. I'm seeing the live group nailing it pretty easily. It's exactly what we want. Interestingly, when we look at stats on this question, people really struggle. I mean, so nearly half of people who try this question get it wrong statistically. And I would argue that that's not so much because the question is hard. It's because the passage is hard, but I think it's often because people aren't reading the passage the way they need to, which is, again, anchoring that big picture. Why? How do these paragraphs connect? You do that, everything's pretty easy from here. And it's great to see the live group. I mean, for the first time in this live stream, out of the 4 questions, I'm seeing everybody just fire the right answer almost right away. And this is a harder question than the first one we did on the salmon habitats. Okay, so primary purpose, is it to trace the historical roots of a modern socio-political movement? Not at all. We're trying to kind of resolve this paradox and kind of, hey, why is it that the feminists are often royalists? Why is that? And then the author presents an explanation for it. So it's the author's primary purpose to present one scholar's explanation for that puzzling phenomenon. Well, that sounds like exactly what we just did. Now, once in a while, I see people try to cross out B for this reason. Only the second paragraph mentions that scholar, right? So Gallagher and her discussion of Cavendish is only in the second paragraph. People go, wait a minute. That's not covered in the whole paragraph or in the whole passage. First paragraph doesn't mention any of that at all. Right. But why is this here? You could argue that first paragraph is setting up, hey, here is this odd fact about the association between feminists and royalism. So setting up the scene, here's this puzzling phenomenon. And now we're going to explain why that is. And it's not the author's opinion, it's Gallagher's. Okay, great. That's exactly what's happening. It doesn't matter that Gallagher's not mentioned in the first paragraph. Now you can see much more kind of, I don't know, I guess even richer versions of that, where that primary purpose might not be obvious even in one paragraph. It might just be sort of a line buried somewhere or something you really have to put together and go, wait a minute, the author only talked about that in half a paragraph out of 4 paragraphs. That's okay. If that's the author's main point and it's what everything built up to, that's all right. Okay, C. Contrast 2 interpretations of the ideological origins of a political conflict. Not at all. I'm not quite sure what the political conflict would be. We're certainly not talking about 2 different interpretations of the origins of feminism. He established a link between the ideology of an influential political theorist and that of a notoriously eccentric writer. Nope, we're not looking up their ideology. So we've got Gallagher explaining what Cavendish was thinking, but we're not doing anything to link those ideologies. D is out. And E, call attention to some points of agreement between opposing sides of an ideological debate. I see some temptation on this from the live group, calling attention to some of the points of agreement between opposing sides. Yeah, because kind of in the first paragraph, there's sort of a little bit of an idea that, well, Filmer, this patriarchalist guy, is sort of associated with royalist ideology, and maybe we shouldn't be doing that. But that's not the heart of the passage, right? Like that's kind of a thing that's a little bit of a side note, kind of setting the scene for why this is puzzling. Well, maybe we shouldn't associate it strictly with Flammarian patriarchalism, but it doesn't matter anyway, because then if that were the case, you'd see an even split between parliamentarians and royalists. So E is certainly not the heart of the passage at all. And our winner is B. All right, we're almost at the hour mark. I'm going to wrap up here. You guys, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for doing this live. If you enjoyed watching this live, please invite your friends. I feed off your energy. So we will do as many of these series as you guys want to see. So I will be here every Friday until you get tired of me, pretty much. So I've got 7 different reading comprehension topics, all built around different question types. But again, if we're going to do a question type, it's going to be anchored in how to read the passage really well so you nail that question type. So it's always going to be good hygiene on the reading, and then we're going to focus a little bit more specifically on certain question types as we move forward. We've got 7 different topics laid out. We will stop if you guys aren't enjoying it. We will do more if you guys are enjoying it, and then we'll roll into critical reasoning from there. So please join us live. Hit that like button, hit the subscribe button. Let us know what you want to see in the series. Let us know in the comments. Let us know on GMATClub. And have fun studying, everybody. And if you want some homework, go Google this passage on GMATClub and answer the rest of the questions and see how you do. All right. With that, have a great day, everybody.